Chapter 7. No Location, No Limitation. To contrast with the analogies discussed in Chapter 2, the Buddha provided 3 analogies to describe the mind that has put an end to renewed becoming. The first analogy is simply a reversal of the field analogies. And if these 5 means of propagation are not broken, not rotten, not damaged by wind and sun, mature and well buried, but there is no earth and no water, would they exhibit growth, increase, and proliferation? No, Lord. And if these 5 means of propagation are broken, rotten, damaged by wind and sun, immature, and poorly buried, but there is earth and water, would they exhibit growth, increase, and proliferation? No, Lord. Like the earth property, monks, is how the 4 standing spots for consciousness should be seen. Like the liquid property is how delight and passion should be seen. Like the 5 means of propagation is how consciousness together with its nutriments should be seen. If a monk abandons passion for the property of form, if a monk abandons passion for the property of feeling, if a monk abandons passion for the property of perception, if a monk abandons passion for the property of fabrications, if a monk abandons passion for the property of consciousness, then owing to the abandonment of passion, the support is cut off, and there is no landing of consciousness. Consciousness, thus not having landed, not increasing, not concocting, is released. Owing to its release, it is steady. Owing to its steadiness, it is contented. Owing to its contentment, it is not agitated. Not agitated, he, the monk, is totally unbound right within. He discerns that birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. There is nothing further for this world. SN 2254. Although this analogy explicitly mentions only 2 alternative ways by which becoming is ended, it contains 3 variables that can actually function in this way: when the seed is deprived of water, when it is deprived of earth, and when it is poorly buried and damaged to the point where it cannot grow. These 3 variables, in differing combinations, relate to the 3 modes in which freedom from becoming, unbinding, is experienced after awakening. ITI 44 describes 2 of these. In the first, the Arhant while still alive experiences the 6 senses, but without any passion, aversion, or delusion. This would correspond to the seeds being deprived of water. In the second, the Arhant at death watches as the 6 senses grow cold through not being relished. This would correspond to the seeds being deprived both of water and of earth. Other discourses, though, describe a third mode, an experience of unbinding in this lifetime that seems to be a foretaste of unbinding after death, in which all experience of the 6 senses is absent. Then, Sariputta, once, friend Ananda, when I was staying right here in Savathai, in the blind man's grove, I reached concentration in such a way that I was neither percipient of earth with regard to earth, nor of water with regard to water, nor of fire, wind, the dimension of the infinitude of space, the dimension of the infinitude of consciousness, the dimension of nothingness, the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception, this world, nor of the next world with regard to the next world, and yet I was still percipient. Then Ananda, but what, friend Sariputta, were you percipient of at that time? Then, Sariputta, the cessation of becoming, unbinding, the cessation of becoming, unbinding. One perception arose in me, friend Ananda, as another perception ceased. Just as in a blazing wood-chip fire, one flame arises as another flame ceases, even so, the cessation of becoming, unbinding, the cessation of becoming, unbinding. One perception arose in me as another one ceased. I was percipient at that time of the cessation of becoming, unbinding, and 10-7. In this case, consciousness is not only devoid of passion, etc., it is also separate from the senses. In terms of the field analogies, this would correspond to the seeds being damaged, stripped of nutriment and moisture, and poorly buried. The second analogy for a mind freed from becoming, dealing specifically with the Arhant's more general experience of unbinding in this lifetime, focuses primarily on the seed. Just as when seeds are not broken, not rotten, not damaged by wind and heat, capable of sprouting, well buried, planted in well-prepared soil, and a man would burn them with fire, and, burning them with fire, would make them into fine ashes. Having made them into fine ashes, he would winnow them before a high wind or wash them away in a swift-flowing stream. Those seeds would thus be destroyed at the root, made like a palmyra stump, deprived of the conditions of development, not destined for future arising. In the same way, any action performed with non-greed, born of non-greed, caused by non-greed, originating from non-greed. When greed is gone, that action is thus abandoned, its root destroyed, made like a palmyra stump, deprived of the conditions of development, not destined for future arising. Any action performed with non-aversion, any action performed with non-delusion, born of non-delusion, caused by non-delusion, originating from non-delusion. When delusion is gone, that action is thus abandoned, its root destroyed, made like a palmyra stump, deprived of the conditions of development, not destined for future arising. And 334. The purpose of this analogy is clear, to explain how an Arhant still engages in intentional activity without producing renewed becoming. He or she has so thoroughly destroyed any trace of passion and delight for action that no present action can possibly sprout into a future karmic result. Although only an Arhant would fully understand what this entails, the analogy does help make sense of the fact that Arhants continue to engage in intentional activity after awakening, practicing generosity, virtue, and concentration, making use of skillful habits, practices, and views, without creating any new karma. One enters and remains in the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana. The fourth jhana, purity of equanimity and mindfulness, neither pleasure nor pain. Such is my instruction, Brahm, to those monks who are in training, who have not attained the heart's goal but remain intent on the unsurpassed safety from bondage. But as for those monks who are Arhants, whose effluents are ended, who have reached fulfillment, done the task, laid down the burden, attained the true goal, totally destroyed the fetter of becoming, and who are released through right gnosis, these dhammas lead both to a pleasant abiding in the here and now and to mindfulness and alertness. MN 107. Ven Sariputta. An Arhant should attend in an appropriate way to these 5 clinging aggregates as inconstant, stressful, a disease, a cancer, an arrow, painful, an affliction, alien, a dissolution, an emptiness, not self. Although for an Arhant there is nothing further to do, and nothing to add to what has been done, still these things, when developed and pursued, lead both to a pleasant abiding in the here and now and to mindfulness and alertness. SN 22 to 122. Although the purpose of this second analogy is clear, its terms are not explicitly defined. The seed would appear to correspond to present intention, i.e., new karma. The fact that it is planted and then destroyed would indicate that Arhant does fabricate intentions, but that their potential to produce becoming is then aborted. But because intention is one of the 4 nutriments for consciousness, the seed might implicitly correspond to consciousness and its other 3 nutriments as well. After all, intention depends on contact, and 663, and the presence of sensory consciousness, SN 12-2. The survival of the Arhant's body depends on food. This would mean that the seed in this analogy corresponds to the same analogs as does the seed in the first analogy in this chapter, consciousness plus its nutriments. And this would further mean that Arhants, in the course of this lifetime, have a special relationship to nutriment and sensory consciousness, just as they do to intention. This interpretation is supported by discourses dealing specifically with the living Arhant's relationship to sensory consciousness and physical food. ITI 44 states unequivocally that the Arhant, during this lifetime, is conscious of the 6 sense media. And what is the unbinding property with fuel remaining? There is the case where a monk is an Arhant whose effluents have ended, who has reached fulfillment, finished the task, laid down the burden, attained the true goal, ended the fetter of becoming, and is released through right gnosis. His 5 sense faculties still remain, and, owing to their being intact, he is cognizant of the agreeable and the disagreeable, and is sensitive to pleasure and pain. His ending of passion, aversion, and delusion is termed the unbinding property with fuel remaining. ITI 44. However, the Arhant's consciousness of the senses occurs with an attitude of being disjoined from them. Then, Nandaka. Just as if a skilled butcher or butcher's apprentice, having killed a cow, were to carve it up with a sharp carving knife so that, without damaging the substance of the inner flesh, without damaging the substance of the outer hide, he would cut, sever, and detach only the skin muscles, connective tissues, and attachments in between. Having cut, severed, and detached the outer skin, and then covering the cow again with that very skin, if he were to say that the cow was joined to the skin just as it had been, would he be speaking rightly? A group of nuns. No, venerable sir. Why is that? Because if the skilled butcher or butcher's apprentice, having killed a cow, were to carve it up with a sharp carving knife so that, without damaging the substance of the inner flesh, without damaging the substance of the outer hide, he would cut, sever, and detach only the skin muscles, connective tissues, and attachments in between, and, having covered the cow again with that very skin, then no matter how much he might say that the cow was joined to the skin just as it had been, the cow would still be disjoined from the skin. Then, Nandaka. This simile, sisters, I have given to convey a message. The message is this: the substance of the inner flesh stands for the 6 internal sense media, the substance of the outer hide for the 6 external sense media. The skin muscles, connective tissues, and attachments in between stand for passion and delight. And the sharp knife stands for noble discernment, the noble discernment that cuts, severs, and detaches the defilements, fetters, and bonds in between. MN 146. Thus, although the Arhant is sensitive to the senses, his or her lack of passion and delight, clinging, alters the way in which this form of nutriment is consumed. A similar dynamic tempers the way in which an Arhant consumes physical food. Not hoarding, having comprehended food, their pasture, emptiness, and freedom without sign, their trail, like that of birds through space, can't be traced. Effluence ended, independent of nutriment, their pasture, emptiness, and freedom without sign, their trail, like that of birds through space, can't be traced. HP 92-93. Being independent of nutriment means not that Arhants no longer have to eat, simply that their attainment, being unconditioned, requires no nutriment. Arhants, like anyone else, need to consume physical food to stay alive. But having fully comprehended the nature of food, which, according to SN 2223, means that they have abandoned all passion, aversion, and delusion with regard to it, the nature of their consumption has radically changed. They consume food simply for the upkeep of the body, for whatever length of time it takes their past karma to run out. Ven Sankika. I don't delight in death, don't delight in living. I await my time, as a worker his wage. I don't delight in death, don't delight in living. I await my time, mindful, alert. Thag 11. Because they consume without delight in either living or dying, there is no clinging in their consumption. Thus the motivation for their eating is both pure and free. This purity and freedom mean that an awakened person eats the country's alms food without debt, since 1611, because the karmic rewards of providing physical requisites for an Arhant are so great that donors who provide them are amply repaid for their gift. In this way, the blissful rewards of awakening are not confined to the awakened, but are shared among those who support them. Although those who seek Arhantship are sometimes criticized as selfish for pursuing their goal, in actual fact one of the motivations for their pursuit is that it offers great rewards to their supporters. Contemplatives, that is how people perceive you, and when asked, "What are you?" you claim that we are contemplatives. So, with this being your designation and this your claim, this is how you should train yourselves. We will undertake and practice those qualities that make one a contemplative, that make one a Brahman, Arhant, so that our designation will be true and our claim accurate, so that the services of those whose robes, alms, food, lodging, and medicinal requisites we use will bring them great fruit and great reward, and so that our going forth will not be barren, but fruitful and fertile. MN 39. Thus the purity of the Arhant's mode of consumption converts their act of receiving into an act of giving. In this way, they transcend the dichotomy of serving self and serving others, in that even in the act of consuming nutriment they produce conditions for widespread happiness. After death, however, Arhants no longer partake of the six sense media, and for that reason no longer partake of the four nutriments. And what is the unbinding property with no fuel remaining? There is the case where a monk is an Arhant whose effluents have ended, who has reached fulfillment, finished the task, laid down the burden, attained the true goal, ended the fetter of becoming, and is released through right gnosis. For him, all that is sensed, being unrelished, will grow cold right here. This is termed the unbinding property with no fuel remaining. These two, proclaimed, by the one with vision, unbinding properties, the one independent, the one who is such. One property, here in this life, with fuel remaining, from the destruction of the guide to becoming, and that with no fuel remaining, after this life, in which all becoming totally ceases. Those who know this state uncompounded, their minds released, through the destruction of the guide to becoming, they, attaining the teaching's core, pleased with ending, have abandoned all becoming. They, the such. ITI 44. Lesson 35 indicates that the all in all that is sensed, being unrelished, will grow cold right here, denotes the six sense media. The term such refers to the fact that the Arhant's attainment is effortlessly unaffected by the arising or passing away of anything related to the six senses. Because sensory consciousness arises in dependence on the six sense media, this suchness is unaffected at the Arhant's death when sensory consciousness totally ends. However, a third analogy raises the question of whether there is another mode of consciousness unaffected by the Arhant's death. In this analogy, awakened consciousness is depicted not as a seed, but as a beam of light. The four nutriments of consciousness are the various places where a beam of light might land, while passion and delight are the means of its landing. Where there is no passion for the nutriment of physical food, where there is no delight, no craving, then consciousness does not land there or grow. Where consciousness does not land or grow, name and form does not alight. Where name and form does not alight, there is no growth of fabrications. Where there is no growth of fabrications, there is no production of renewed becoming in the future. Where there is no production of renewed becoming in the future, there is no future birth, aging, and death. That, I tell you, has no sorrow, affliction, or despair. Similarly, with the nutriment of contact, intellectual intention, and consciousness. Just as if there were a roofed house or a roofed hall having windows on the north, the south, or the east. When the sun rises and a ray has entered by way of the window, where does it land? On the western wall, Lord. And if there is no western wall, where does it land? On the ground, Lord. And if there is no ground, where does it land? On the water, Lord. And if there is no water, where does it land? It does not land, Lord. In the same way, where there is no passion for the nutriment of physical food, contact, intellectual intention, consciousness, where there is no delight, no craving, then consciousness does not land there or grow. Where consciousness does not land or grow, name and form does not alight. Where name and form does not alight, there is no growth of fabrications. Where there is no growth of fabrications, there is no production of renewed becoming in the future. Where there is no production of renewed becoming in the future, there is no future birth, aging, and death. That, I tell you, has no sorrow, affliction, or despair. Ascend 1264. This analogy does not specifically state whether it refers to the Arhant before or after death. However, in the context of this analogy, the beam of light depends on the wall, the ground, etc., only for the fact of its appearance and growth within space and time. This suggests that it otherwise would not be affected when the nutriments disappear. Thus, the analogy would refer to the Arhant both before and after death. This interpretation is supported by two contexts, one authorial and the other textual. The authorial context is that if the Buddha's awakening had revealed that total unbinding was a state of total unconsciousness, he would never have thought of using this analogy to describe the awakened state. The textual context is provided by MN 49, which states that, in contrast to the consciousness of an unawakened being, which is known only through its interaction with Kama, the Arhant's knowledge of unconditioned consciousness is totally unmediated. Having directly known the all, the six sense media and their objects, CSN 3523, as the all, and having directly known the extent of what has not been experienced through the allness of the all, I wasn't the all, I wasn't in the all, I wasn't coming forth from the all, I wasn't, the all is mine. I didn't affirm the all. Consciousness without surface, without end, luminous all around, has not been experienced through the earthness of earth, the liquidity of liquid, the fieriness of fire, the windiness of wind, the beingness of beings, the devaness of devas, the Pijapati-ness of Pijapati, the Brahmaness of Brahma, the radiantness of the radiant devas, the beautiful blackness of the beautiful black devas, the sky fruitness of the sky fruit devas, the conqueror-ness of the conqueror, the allness of the all. MN 49. A basic feature of the Buddhist teachings on causality is that if X depends on Y for its existence, it will cease when Y ceases. But because consciousness without surface, unlike sensory consciousness, is known independently of the six sense media, it will not cease when they do. Consciousness without surface, without end, luminous all around. Here water, earth, fire, and wind have no footing. Here long and short, coarse and fine, fair and foul. Here name and form are all brought to a stop without trace. With the cessation of the aggregate of consciousness, each is here brought to a stop. In 11. Reading this verse in light of MN 49, the cessation of consciousness would seem to refer to the cessation of the aggregate of sensory consciousness, whereas consciousness without surface would not be touched by that cessation. This is because this mode of consciousness would also lie outside the aggregates, inasmuch as the aggregate of consciousness covers only those forms of consciousness that can be located in space and time. Consciousness without surface, however, no longer has a place defined by craving and clinging, and so does not fall under the categories of time or space. This consciousness should not be confused with the radiant mind of in 151-52. As those discourses state, the radiant mind is something that can be developed. In terms of the duties of the Four Noble Truths, this indicates that the radiant mind is part of the truth of the path. As with other skillful states of becoming, it is to be developed until it has served its purpose and then relinquished. Consciousness without surface, however, is related to the truth of cessation, and as such cannot be developed, it can only be realized. Viewed in terms of the third analogy, the radiance of the radiant mind would count as something that can be pointed to, for it still lands on its nutriment. Thus, it is a state of becoming centered on a location. Consciousness without surface, however, does not land, and so its luminosity cannot be pointed to, for it reflects off of nothing. A practical test for distinguishing between these two types of awareness would be to contemplate any form of awareness, no matter how radiant or pure, so as to foster a sense of dispassion for it, using the techniques recommended in Chapter 6. This would deprive the radiant mind of its nutriment, but would have no effect on consciousness without surface, which has no need for nutriment, just as a light beam has no need for anywhere to land. The analogy between consciousness without surface and an unreflected light beam carries other implications as well. The first is that, just as a light beam that is not reflected off any surface cannot be apprehended, and in that sense has no location, in the same way, a person whose consciousness does not land and become established on any object cannot be apprehended either in this life or after death, even by those with extensive psychic powers. Effluence ended, independent of nutriment, their pasture, emptiness, and freedom without sign. Their trail, like that of birds through space, can't be traced. DHP 93. And when the Devas, together with Indra, the Brahmas, and Pijapati, search for the monk whose mind is thus released, they cannot find that the consciousness of the one truly gone, Tathagata, is dependent on this. Why is that? The one truly gone is untraceable even in the here and now. MN 22. Then the Blessed One went with a large number of monks to the black rock on the slope of Isagili. From afar he saw Venvakali lying dead on a couch. Now at that time a smokiness, a darkness was moving to the east, moving to the west, moving to the north, the south, above, below, moving to the intermediate directions. The Blessed One said, "Monks, do you see that smokiness, that darkness?" "Yes, Lord." "That is Mara, the evil one. He is searching for the consciousness of Vakali the clansman. Where is the consciousness of Vakali the clansman established? But monks, it is through unestablished consciousness that Vakali the clansman has become totally unbound. SN 2287. Because the Arhant's consciousness has no location, it is totally undefined. If one doesn't stay obsessed with form, monk, that's not what one is measured/limited by. Whatever one isn't measured by, that's not how one is classified. If one doesn't stay obsessed with feeling, if one doesn't stay obsessed with perception, if one doesn't stay obsessed with fabrications, if one doesn't stay obsessed with consciousness, that's not what one is measured/limited by. Whatever one isn't measured by, that's not how one is classified. SN 2236. When one is undefined, one cannot be described as existing or not existing, either in the present life or after death. Considering the ground, crushing the seed, he wouldn't provide it with moisture. Truly a sage, seer of the ending of birth. Abandoning conjecture, he cannot be classified. SN 112. What do you think, Anurata? Do you regard form as the Tathagata? No, Lord. Do you regard feeling as the Tathagata? No, Lord. Do you regard perception as the Tathagata? No, Lord. Do you regard fabrications as the Tathagata? No, Lord. Do you regard consciousness as the Tathagata? No, Lord. What do you think, Anurata? Do you regard the Tathagata as being in form, elsewhere than form, in feeling, elsewhere than feeling, in perception, elsewhere than perception, in fabrications, elsewhere than fabrications, in consciousness, elsewhere than consciousness? No, Lord. What do you think, Anurata? Do you regard the Tathagata as form, feeling, perception, fabrications, consciousness? No, Lord. Do you regard the Tathagata as that which is without form, without feeling, without perception, without fabrications, without consciousness? No, Lord. And so, Anurata, when you can't pin down the Tathagata as a truth or reality even in the present life, is it proper for you to declare, friends, the Tathagata, the supreme man, the superlative man, attainer of the superlative attainment, being described, is described otherwise than with these four positions? The Tathagata exists after death, does not exist after death, both does and does not exist after death, neither exists nor does not exist after death? No, Lord. Very good, Anurata, very good. Both formerly and now, it is only stress that I describe, and the cessation of stress. SN 2286. But Master Gotama, the monk whose mind is thus released, where does he reappear? Reappear, Vaka, doesn't apply. In that case, Master Gotama, he does not reappear. Does not reappear, Vaka, doesn't apply. Both does and does not reappear. Doesn't apply. Neither does nor does not reappear. Doesn't apply. How is it, Master Gotama, when Master Gotama is asked if the monk reappears, does not reappear, both does and does not reappear? Neither does nor does not reappear, he says. That doesn't apply in each case. At this point, Master Gotama, I am befuddled, at this point confused. The modicum of clarity coming to me from your earlier conversation is now obscured. Of course you're befuddled, Vaka. Of course you're confused. Deep, Vaka, is this phenomenon, hard to see, hard to realize, tranquil, refined, beyond the scope of conjecture, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. For those with other views, other practices, other satisfactions, other aims, other teachers, it is difficult to know. That being the case, I will now put some questions to you. Answer as you see fit. What do you think, Vaka? If a fire were burning in front of you, would you know that this fire is burning in front of me? Yes. And suppose someone were to ask you, Vaka, this fire burning in front of you, dependent on what is it burning? Thus asked, how would you reply? I would reply, this fire burning in front of me is burning dependent on grass and timber as its sustenance. If the fire burning in front of you were to go out, would you know that this fire burning in front of me has gone out? Yes. And suppose someone were to ask you, this fire that has gone out in front of you, in which direction from here has it gone? East, west, north, or south? Thus asked, how would you reply? That doesn't apply, Master Gautama. Any fire burning dependent on a sustenance of grass and timber, being unnourished from having consumed that sustenance and not being offered any other, is classified simply as out/unbound. Even so, Vaka, any form by which one describing the Tathagata would describe him, that the Tathagata has abandoned, its root destroyed, made like a palmyra stump, deprived of the conditions of development, not destined for future arising. Freed from the classification of form, Vaka, the Tathagata is deep, boundless, hard to fathom, like the sea. Reappears doesn't apply, does not reappear doesn't apply, both does and does not reappear doesn't apply, neither reappears nor does not reappear doesn't apply. Any feeling, any perception, any mental fabrication, any consciousness by which one describing the Tathagata would describe him, that the Tathagata has abandoned, its root destroyed, made like a palmyra stump, deprived of the conditions of development, not destined for future arising. Freed from the classification of consciousness, Vaka, the Tathagata is deep, boundless, hard to fathom, like the sea. Reappears doesn't apply, does not reappear doesn't apply, both does and does not reappear doesn't apply, neither reappears nor does not reappear doesn't apply. MN 71. Touching liberation with the heart. The state of peace, unsurpassed, consummate in terms of signs, peaceful, enjoying the peaceful state, judicious, an attainer of wisdom, makes use of classifications, but can't be classified. ITI 63. Apashiva. He who has reached the end, does he not exist? Or is he for eternity free from disease? Please, sage, declare this to me, as this phenomenon Dhamma has been known by you. The Buddha, one who has reached the end, has no criterion that limit, by which anyone would say that, for him it doesn't exist. When all phenomena, Dhamma, are done away with, all means of speaking are done away with as well, as Sin 5-6. Even the act of asking whether anything or nothing remains after reaching the end is to engage in categories of thought that are appropriate only within the context of space and time, but inappropriate to the sphere of awakening. Then, Mahakathita, with the remainderless dispassion cessation of the six contact media, is there anything else? Then, Sariputta, don't say that, my friend. Then, Mahakathita, with the remainderless dispassion cessation of the six contact media, is there not anything else? Then, Sariputta, don't say that, my friend. Then, Mahakathita, is it the case that there both is and is not anything else? Then, Sariputta, don't say that, my friend. Then, Mahakathita, is it the case that there neither is nor is not anything else? Then, Sariputta, don't say that, my friend. Then, Mahakathita, being asked if there is anything else, you say, don't say that, my friend. Being asked if there is not anything else, if there both is and is not anything else. If there neither is nor is not anything else, you say, don't say that, my friend. Now, how is the meaning of this statement to be understood? Then, Sariputta, saying, that is there anything else? That is there not anything else? Is it the case that there both is and is not anything else? Is it the case that there neither is nor is not anything else? One is complicating non-complication. However far the six contact media go, that is how far complication goes. However far complication goes, that is how far the six contact media go. With the remainderless dispassion cessation of the six contact media, there comes to be the cessation, the allaying of complication, and 173. Although the classifications of words are inadequate to describe unbinding, because words are fabricated phenomena, part of a causal chain in which unbinding does not participate, the discourses nevertheless describe three of unbinding's aspects in positive terms. The first aspect is suchness, a term we have already met, which means that the Arhant is unaffected by the arising or passing away of anything related to the six senses. Unlike equanimity, which is an activity of the mind, the suchness involves no effort or activity at all. Because it is effortless, this suchness lies beyond questions of control and lack of control. Thus questions of self and not self are also irrelevant. The Arhant is simply such. Thus the Tathagata, being the same with regard to all phenomena that can be seen, heard, sensed, and cognized, is such. And I tell you, there is no such higher or more sublime. And 420. He whose senses are steadied, like stallions, well trained by the charioteer, his conceit abandoned, free of effluent. Such. Even devas adore him. Like the earth, he doesn't react. Cultured. Such. Like Indra's pillar. Like a lake free of mud. For him. Such. There's no traveling on. Calm is his mind. Calm his speech and his deed. One who's released, through right knowing, pacified, such. DHP 94-96. Abraham, Arhant, not led by habits or practices, gone to the beyond. Such. Doesn't fall back, SN 4-5. For the monk who has left all karma behind, shaking off the dust of the past, steady, unpossessive, such. There's no point in telling anyone else, 3-1. Knowing the world, seeing the highest goal, crossing the ocean, the flood. Such. His chains broken, unattached, effluent free. The enlightened call him a sage, SN 112. The second positive aspect of unbinding is sukha, a term that can be translated as pleasure, happiness, bliss, or ease. Unbinding, as experienced in this lifetime, is invariably described as pleasurable. And because this pleasure is unconditioned, it is not affected by the Arhant's death. If the thought should occur to you that, when defiling mental qualities are abandoned and bright mental qualities have grown, and one enters and remains in the culmination and abundance of discernment, having known and realized it for oneself in the here and now, one's abiding is stressful/painful, you should not see it in that way. When defiling mental qualities are abandoned and bright mental qualities have grown, and one enters and remains in the culmination and abundance of discernment, having known and realized it for oneself in the here and now, there is joy, rapture, serenity, mindfulness, alertness, and a pleasant/happy abiding. DN 9. I have heard that on one occasion, then Sariputta was staying near Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrels' feeding sanctuary. There he said to the monks, "This unbinding is pleasant, friends, this unbinding is pleasant." When this was said, Ven Udayan said to Ven Sariputta, "But what is the pleasure here, my friend, where there is nothing felt?" "Just that is the pleasure here, my friend, where there is nothing felt. There are these 5 strings of sensuality, which 5 forms cognizable via the eye, agreeable, pleasing, charming, endearing, accompanied by sensuality, enticing, sounds cognizable via the ear, smells cognizable via the nose, tastes cognizable via the tongue, tactile sensations cognizable via the body, agreeable, pleasing, charming, endearing, accompanied by sensuality, enticing. Whatever pleasure or joy arises in dependence on these 5 strings of sensuality, that is sensual pleasure. Now there is the case where a monk enters and remains in the first jhana. If, as he remains there, he is beset with attention to perceptions dealing with sensuality, that is an affliction for him. Just as pain arises as an affliction in a healthy person, even so the attention to perceptions dealing with sensuality that beset the monk is an affliction for him. Now the Blessed One has said that whatever is an affliction is stress. So by this line of reasoning it may be known how unbinding is pleasant. Then there is the case where a monk enters and remains in the second jhana. If, as he remains there, he is beset with attention to perceptions dealing with directed thought. That is an affliction for him. Then there is the case where a monk enters and remains in the third jhana. If, as he remains there, he is beset with attention to perceptions dealing with rapture, that is an affliction for him. Then there is the case where a monk enters and remains in the fourth jhana. If, as he remains there, he is beset with attention to perceptions dealing with equanimity, that is an affliction for him. Then there is the case where a monk enters and remains in the dimension of the infinitude of space. If, as he remains there, he is beset with attention to perceptions dealing with form, that is an affliction for him. Then there is the case where a monk enters and remains in the dimension of the infinitude of consciousness. If, as he remains there, he is beset with attention to perceptions dealing with the dimension of the infinitude of space, that is an affliction for him. Then there is the case where a monk enters and remains in the dimension of nothingness. If, as he remains there, he is beset with attention to perceptions dealing with the dimension of the infinitude of consciousness, that is an affliction for him. Then there is the case where a monk enters and remains in the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. If, as he remains there, he is beset with attention to perceptions dealing with the dimension of nothingness, that is an affliction for him. Now, the Blessed One has said that whatever is an affliction is stress. So by this line of reasoning, it may be known how unbinding is pleasant. Then there is the case where a monk, with the complete transcending of the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception, enters and remains in the cessation of perception and feeling. And, having seen that with discernment, his effluents are completely ended. So by this line of reasoning it may be known how unbinding is pleasant. And 934. Now it's possible, Ananda, that some wanderers of other persuasions might say, Gautama the contemplative speaks of the cessation of perception and feeling and yet describes it as pleasure. What is this? How is this? When they say that, they are to be told, it's not the case, friends, that the Blessed One describes only pleasant feeling as included under pleasure. Wherever pleasure is found, in whatever terms, the Blessed One describes it as pleasure, as Sin 36:19. Some Nigantha ascetics, it's not the case that pleasure is to be attained through pleasure. Pleasure is to be attained through pain. For if pleasure were to be attained through pleasure, then King Senya Bimbisara of Magadha would attain pleasure, for he lives in greater pleasure than you, friend Gautama. The Buddha, surely the Venerable Nigantha said that rashly and without reflecting. For instead I should be asked, who lives in greater pleasure, King Senya Bimbisara of Magadha or Venerable Gautama? Yes, friend Gautama, we said that rashly and without reflecting, but let that be. We now ask you, Venerable Gautama, who lives in greater pleasure, King Senya Bimbisara of Magadha or Venerable Gautama? In that case, Niganthas, I will question you in return. Answer as you see fit. What do you think? Can King Senya Bimbisara of Magadha, without moving his body, without uttering a word, dwell sensitive to unalloyed pleasure for 7 days and nights? No, friend. For 6 days and nights? For 5 days and nights? For a day and a night? No, friend. Now, I, without moving my body, without uttering a word, can dwell sensitive to unalloyed pleasure for a day and a night, for 2 days and nights, for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days and nights. So what do you think? That being the case, who dwells in greater pleasure, King Senya Bimbisara of Magadha or I? That being the case, Venerable Gautama dwells in greater pleasure than King Senya Bimbisara of Magadha. MN 14. Although unbinding is the foremost pleasure, DHP 203, an Arhant does not cling to it and so is not limited by it. When a sage, a Brahman through sagacity, has known for himself, then from form and formless, from pleasure and pain, he is freed. 110. Freedom, in fact, is the third aspect, and the one that the discourses most frequently attribute to unbinding. This is because the suchness of the Arhant's attainment is free from conditioned influences. Although living Arhants still experience their field of karma in the form of the aggregates and sense media, that experience creates no direct impact on them. Sensing a feeling of pleasure, one discerns that it is fleeting, not grasped at, not relished. Sensing a feeling of pain, sensing a feeling of neither pleasure nor pain, one discerns that it is fleeting, not grasped at, not relished. Sensing a feeling of pleasure, one senses it disjoined from it. Sensing a feeling of pain, sensing a feeling of neither pleasure nor pain, one senses it disjoined from it. When sensing a feeling limited to the body, one discerns that I am sensing a feeling limited to the body. When sensing a feeling limited to life, one discerns that I am sensing a feeling limited to life. One discerns that, with the breakup of the body after the termination of life, all that is experienced, not being relished, will grow cold right here. MN 140. With no passion, delight, or relishing for anything at all, not even for the state of dispassion, there is nowhere for the Arhant to be bound. This fact explains a Pali idiom that has long given trouble to Western translators. Poems in the canon often mention the Arhant as being everywhere released, Sabbatha Vimutto, or everywhere independent, Sabbatha Ṭhānissaro. Translators, lacking a sense of the underlying image of the idiom, have tended to render it in more prosaic terms, completely released in every respect, not dependent on anything, released from everything. However, in light of the field analogies, in which the moisture of craving and delight creates the where for becoming, the idiom means precisely what it says. The Arhant is released from every possible where, whether fabricated or not, every possible spot for renewed becoming. Gone to the beyond of becoming, you let go of in front, let go of behind, let go of between. With a heart everywhere released, you don't come again to birth and aging. HP3 40 Suba. I, unimpassioned, unblemished, with a mind everywhere released, knowing the unattractiveness of fabricated things. My heart adheres nowhere at all. Fig 14. Then, Rivada's last words. Attain completion through heedfulness. That is my message. So then, I'm about to be unbound. I'm released everywhere. Thag 14:1.